Here we are. It's been about a week. Sorry that we couldn't be live for you on Monday, but here we are. Today's segment is about college football playoff rankings. We're going to talk some Michigan versus Ohio State too, so you Buckeye and Wolverine fans, we'll get to have some fun with that. And then we're going to, of course, have to talk about the game of the week in Tennessee versus Georgia. The spread has been narrowed to just 8 in favor of Georgia. And as someone who, has a social media presence, although it's very limited, and YouTube counts as well, I have seen some interesting things about this Tennessee-Georgia game, especially relating to popular opinion, that I'm not necessarily a fan of if you've predicted a Tennessee win. Welcome in, y'all. Hey, EK Films. I finally made it on time for a stream. Go Big Red. Go Big Red indeed. Hello, Wolf58. Nothing much is up except for this stream. Today was a light day. I just had one class that lasted for 50 minutes, and I did a video which will release automatically at 7:45, and now I'm doing this. I'm gonna do some homework after that, but before I go to bed. But we're here to talk college football, so let me know in the chat right now what game you all are most excited to see this week outside of Tennessee, Georgia, because I feel like that is going to be the popular answer. A game outside of Tennessee, Georgia that I'm excited to at least hear about the result of is Alabama versus LSU. Michigan State, Illinois, Penn State, Indiana are some Big Ten games where the favorites, Penn State and Illinois, are favored by double digits, and they could very well win in blowouts, but I could also see Indiana play Penn State close, and I could see Michigan State even playing Illinois close, despite a lot of the suspensions that have gone on, for sure. I want to start with the college football playoff rankings, and then we'll go into Tennessee, Georgia, and we'll preview Michigan and Ohio State and talk about some things. First and foremost, the college football playoff rankings. At number 1, you have Tennessee. Number 2, you have Ohio State. Number 3, you have Georgia. And number 4, you have Clemson. These matchups have not yet happened in the college football playoff era. I don't even think they've happened in the regular season in the college football playoff era. Tennessee versus Clemson, Ohio State versus Georgia. Those would be some exciting matchups. I think out of those matchups, if the season ended today and we had to have a playoff, I think it would result in Ohio State versus Tennessee. Ohio State would win the national championship from there. And currently, in my top 25, which I have yet to release, but I'll release it in a post early tomorrow morning, I'll schedule it, I do still have Ohio State at 1. There's been a lot of movement outside of that one constant, though, which does include my Michigan Wolverines. They fell from that number 2 spot. You'll see whether they fell to 3 or 4 tomorrow, as I myself disagree with the fact that they're at 5. Teams outside of the top 4, but who are still in playoff contention, would be number 6 Alabama. I already mentioned number 5 Michigan, number 7 TCU, number 8 Oregon, number 9 USC. I'm going to say number 11 Mississippi or Ole Miss, maybe number 12 UCLA. I skipped over number 10 LSU, and if LSU did win out, including the SEC championship game, I would believe they'd get in the playoff because they're ranked top 10 with 2 losses, which I think is, honestly do think is ridiculous, because even if they did beat Alabama by efficiency metrics and a lot of other metrics, which I made some of my own personal rankings and then combined them with metrics to get a quote-unquote unbiased or more accurate result. I call it the anti-bias index. LSU is tabbed as severely overrated in the top 10. Their efficiency metrics, their points per game, everything is off. They're a boom or bust team, and even though I think that there is a very good chance they will beat Alabama this weekend, they are sure as heck not beating Tennessee or Georgia. They're not. Tennessee dominated them. Alabama, there's a reason Alabama's favored by double digits, but even if they beat the Tide, Georgia or Tennessee would likely smoke that team all over again. Chris Hudson, Alabama versus LSU, Dem Dogs, what's up? How are you doing? Ohio State versus Georgia would be a hell of a matchup. That would be. Two teams, Georgia being the more old. Georgia really reminds me of old school style Bama. That's what Georgia reminds me of. Alabama doesn't even resemble those earlier Alabama teams. They're totally a spread. They're a spread team that does have a softness to them, while Georgia is very hard, tough on defense, but their offense at times is, like older Alabama football teams, their offense isn't built to engage in shootouts. They can't win when their defense isn't performing at a B level or higher. Hi, Aiden. How are you doing? And I do want to point out that in the top 10, the SEC has the highest ranked undefeated team, the highest ranked one-loss team, and the highest ranked two-loss team. In my opinion, that is SEC bias, not because Tennessee's ranked number 1 or Alabama's ranked number 6. I think the SEC, by the metrics that the college football playoff uses, deserves to have the highest ranked undefeated and one-loss team. Alabama and Tennessee both have by far the best strength of records out of teams inside the top 10. TCU would be the next closest team as they've beaten multiple ranked teams. However, LSU being ahead of Kansas State and ahead of Utah, in my opinion, are somewhat questionable, especially Kansas State. Kansas State just blew out Oklahoma State out of the water. If not for injuries to Will Howard and Adrian Martinez occurring on the same night, they would have beaten TCU. Their only other loss is to 19th ranked Tulane. They themselves lost to a good team in their own conference. LSU has had 2 losses to Florida State, who's unranked in the college football playoff, and they got blown out by Tennessee in a game that was never, ever close. So I don't know. You can tell me. Tommy Grace, how are you doing? EK Films, I know it won't be a good game, but I'm curious how wild Ohio State versus Northwestern will be. That will be a butchering of biblical proportions. Also, Tommy Grace, I do want to shout you out and thank you for checking out my merchandise page and buying some of my merch. So thank you for that. Wolf58, College Football Playoff Committee gives far too much weight to SEC wins and losses. Yes, they do. Ole Miss is an example of a team who I think is very overrated. I haven't had them in my top 10 for most of the season. I don't even have them inside of my top 15. Ole Miss is definitely an overrated team. There's reasons to have LSU close to the top 10, and there's reasons to have Alabama at 6, Tennessee at 1, Georgia at 3. I don't see very many reasons for Ole Miss to be a top 15 team, and outside of Ole Miss, there are no other ranked SEC teams, as South Carolina lost in humiliating fashion to Missouri. Let's talk about teams who aren't going to reach the college football playoff but could contend for a New Year's Six Bowl, which is basically the entire college football playoff top 25 at this point. LSU at number 10, though again, they could contend for the CFP. I don't see a path for them doing so, given how wildly, I would say, just they're not balanced, wildly unhinged they can be at times. Kansas State, they already have 2 losses. Utah at 14. Penn State at 15. Illinois at 16 technically has a path, but they have to beat Michigan in the regular season, and then they have to face either Michigan again, or more likely than not, Ohio State and Indy. So 2 top 4 teams they'll have to face if they want a path. And with their talent disparity, absolutely not. North Carolina at 17. Oklahoma State at 18, Tulane at 19, Syracuse at 20, Wake Forest at 21, NC State at 22, Oregon State at 23, Texas at 24, UCF at 25, Texas, UCF, Oregon State, NC State, Wake Forest, and Syracuse, that 20 through 25 spot, the best they could get is like a top-tier non-New Year's Six bowl game. Texas has 3 losses, for example. Listen, I am guilty. I'm guilty of saying that they were back when they were 5-2 and they blew out Oklahoma. And then they lost to Oklahoma State. Ewers looked anything but good. And now that opinion certainly has to be held into question. Blank name, not a Big Ten football thing, but can you imagine if LSU knocks off Alabama this weekend? That would cause absolute chaos. And seeing that Alabama is 6th, like they're behind Michigan and Clemson, and according to power rankings, there is reason to have them in the top 4. If Alabama loses to LSU, and let's say LSU is unhinged again and they have like this miraculous performance and they beat Alabama by a touchdown or more, Alabama will probably be out of playoff contention at that point. And this is where things get wonky with the college football playoff. We saw this with Auburn in 2017. If your losses are early enough, a 2-loss team with 2 early losses will be viewed more favorably than a 1-loss team with a very late November loss, even if it is to higher caliber teams, which I think is ridiculous. It's why, in my view, unless absolute chaos happens, Oregon should not, though they had 1 early loss, the loss they had to Georgia and how weak, I mean, they did beat UCLA and they'll have to face Utah, so they'll be battle tested. But that loss to Georgia will very much hinder them. And it should. It absolutely should. Georgia has looked bored. Georgia has not looked like the number 1 team, in my opinion. If you take that loss out of consideration, like week 1 just didn't exist, Oregon would look like the far better team compared to Georgia. Not maybe far better, that's an exaggeration, but they'd look like the better team. And they lost by 40 plus to Georgia in what was nearly a top 10 matchup. Would you say Ewers has been a disappointment thus far, Sam? I would say so, Hummus Hero. That game against Oklahoma State, which truth be told, after their game against Kansas State, Oklahoma's defense is just, Jim Knowles was the mastermind, and hasn't even been close to the same since he left. Ewers has been a disappointment. People were saying, Josh Pate said early in, like he said in the preseason, or early in the season, I forget which, that Texas could have the best offensive trio with Bijan Robinson, Xavier Worthy, and Ewers, by the way, all of whom are slightly or very much so overrated to their respective positions. I don't like Bijan Robinson. Xavier Worthy, I'd say, is properly rated, a very good wide receiver. Robinson and Ewers are vastly, they're pretty overrated. That's just my humble opinion, especially Ewers, especially him. Texas at 5-3, they very well could have a skid to where they finish around 500. I think they'll make a bowl game, but look at last year. They were 4-1 at one point, and then they finished on a 1-6 run. I mean, anything can happen with Texas. I think that game against Oklahoma State proved that they have a lot of work to do when it comes to mental toughness. I think Ewers will get better if Steve Sarkisian stays, and Texas looks better than they did last year. That's for sure. So I think Ewers will get better, but for this year, all the hype surrounding him, all the talk with him, it was crazy. Absolutely crazy. Tommy Grace, yes sir, gotta support my Michigan classmates. Well, I will thank you for that. Who's my pick for the Group of 5 representative in the New Year's Six bowl game? I would say it has to be Tulane. It has to be Tulane. They're 7-1. They beat a solid Kansas State team. Kansas State, if they continue to win, and it looks like, in my opinion, they'll continue to win. If they continue to win, it'll boost Tulane's resume. Absolutely. If Tulane loses a game, then it is probably UCF. And UCF is another one of those teams where they lost to Louisville and East Carolina, both of whom are actually solid units, but Two-loss team, they've looked very bipolar at times, UCF has, similarly to LSU, but my money would be on Tulane at this point. I mean, they're 7-1 and they're already in the top 20. And Tulane has not been known for anything. They haven't had a reputation. Normally, a school like Tulane in the conference that they're in, they would be 8 and even if they were 8-0 right now, they'd be ranked around here or lower than here, but they're ranked 19th. So, whatever Willie Fritz has going on at that program, good for him. Good for him. That's enough on the college football playoff rankings, I think. Let me go from top to bottom one more time for you all. Tennessee is at 1, Ohio State's at 2, Georgia tabs in at 3, Clemson tabs in at 4. I'll actually spend 30 seconds on this. Clemson ahead of Michigan is it's not an absolute crime at all, because Clemson technically has played more ranked opponents, but I think it's a little bit egregious. Clemson is below Michigan in football power, in AP and coaches poll ranking, in SRS, which is simple ranking system. They're below Clemson's below them by multiple places in game control and average in-game win probability. Michigan's top 10 in scoring, offense and defense per game. Clemson is not even top 15 in those categories. Clemson is top 20 in offensive efficiency, but not top 25 in defensive efficiency. Michigan is 12th in both of those categories. Michigan would win, in my opinion, by double digits against Clemson. That's my opinion. Absolutely my opinion. I think that Tennessee, Ohio State, and Georgia can all make very good cases that they're better than Michigan. Heck, even Alabama, I think, could make a case for that. Or maybe, even though TCU has no defense, their offense is good enough to where they could get an early start on Michigan and hang around. I don't think Clemson has that same matchup against Michigan. I just don't. I do not think so at all. Alabama, I don't think they're a great team right now. Well, at least an elite team. They're good to great. But with the talent they have and the head coach they have, you can never count them out until they have 2 losses or more. All right. Next up, let's talk about Tennessee, Georgia, and what is the game of the week. So the number 1 team in the college football playoff rankings is taking on the number 1 team in the AP poll. Georgia's number 1 in the AP poll. Clemson's number 1 in the college football playoff rankings. Georgia's favored by 8. But Georgia's 4-4 against the spread. Tennessee 7-1 against the spread. A lot of people, to what I think should be a concern to Tennessee fans, a lot of people are picking Tennessee to win this game. I think part of that is just the fact that Georgia and Alabama have been the dominant powerhouses in their respective divisions for half a decade, and people want to see change, so they're just going to vote for a change even if they know or don't think there is a logical way around it. But I think that, some of Tennessee's comments, like their fan base comments, a lot of the support that's been around Tennessee, that can certainly light a fire under a Georgia team who's going to be at home in Sanford Stadium. It's a 3:30 p.m. game, Eastern time, and Georgia has the raw talent advantage. That's actually the biggest advantage Georgia has, is not in efficiency, not in points per game. Points allowed per game is 1, but Tennessee did very well against Kentucky, and they did very well against Kentucky, and against Alabama, they allowed 49 points, but Alabama could, if they played just a B+, A- game, could score 49 points on most teams in the country. Georgia, look at Georgia in 2021, a defense that is far better than this Georgia defense, in my opinion. Alabama, they had a worse running back. John Mechie was injured in that second half, and they just destroyed that Georgia defense. And a lot of that had to do with matchups, which, in my opinion, is the reason I picked Tennessee to win this game. Georgia's secondary is, in my opinion, not in a position to destroy Tennessee's offense or to severely limit Tennessee's offense to less than 20 points per game. or less than 20 points in this game. And maybe I'm wrong. There's a big chance that I could be wrong, just because the nature of the raw talent that Georgia has. Georgia's been a team that has looked sleepy for the past several games, and I think part of that's just due to the fact that, listen, they haven't played anyone close to their level in talent or performance or efficiency since Oregon. And they beat Oregon 49-3, and I think there's a really good argument that this Oregon team is not the same Oregon team that went into Atlanta. Very good argument there. And Oregon themselves, outside of UCLA, they haven't played anyone. BYU, who is close to top 10 when they beat them, now is a losing record. Eastern Washington's no one. Washington State, they struggled against them. Stanford's no one. Same thing with Arizona, and same thing with Cal. Georgia's strength of schedule is very weak. They're not battle-tested one bit, in my opinion. Tennessee is. But again, home field advantage for Georgia. And regardless of whether Georgia's battle-tested this season, they're coached by Kirby Smart. They're coached by Todd Monken on offense and by Glenn Schumann and Will Muschamp on defense. Like, they have coaches. They have physicality. They have dogs, which is ironic to say, at the defensive line, at linebacker, at secondary. Stetson Bennett, his caliber of play hasn't been like last year's caliber of play or like the caliber of play against Oregon, but he's shown that he can make plays both through the air and through the ground. Georgia's offensive line is one of the most talented in the nation. I look at this game, and either team can win this game, and it does remind me a lot of LSU Alabama in 2019 for the fact that the road team is ranked as the better team. A lot of people think the road team's the better team. The road team has the more explosive offense, but more questionable defense. They don't have the same reputation. And the home team, better defense, better head coach, and they're favored by around a touchdown in the spread. And that's what it reminds me of, honestly. That's really what this game reminds me of, is 2019 LSU versus Bama. And this is where you're going to see whether Tennessee is a team that is capable of winning the national title or not. 2019 LSU had a close game against, they had a close game against Auburn that season. They had a close game against Texas early in the year on the road. Same thing with Tennessee and Pittsburgh. And like Pittsburgh this year, Texas in 2019 wasn't a good team, like many thought at the time. Florida, similar story with the Auburn game. Then Tennessee, crushes LSU. They have their close game with Bama, which is at home. 2019 LSU did not have a matchup like that. LSU didn't play Alabama and Georgia in the regular season. At the same time, they didn't. And now Tennessee has the ultimate test, a test that is bigger than Bama. I think maybe not mentally, because they snapped a 17-game losing streak to the Tide, but by the fact that it's on the road, by virtue of Georgia's just the better team, they're more physical, they're more disciplined. By all those accounts, this is the biggest test that Tennessee has faced. It's the biggest test. And last year, Tennessee had a chance to play spoiler in this game, because it was the best offense that Georgia had faced all year when Georgia entered that stadium, Neyland Stadium. Briefly escaped my mind. And Georgia got down early. Tennessee went up 7-0, and then Georgia took control and smashed Tennessee, smashed their head into the wall. And the drywall broke, and Tennessee just died. It was like 41-17 was the final score. Tennessee can't let that happen in this game. They have to start out fast, but then, as I said in my preview video, they have to play all 4 quarters tough. What Georgia can't do is they can't get down early, because unlike last season, Tennessee's offense is more consistent. They're just as explosive, but in a far more consistent way, which makes them so much deadlier. And Tennessee's defense, it's not perfect, but it's improved. Their secondary looked great against Kentucky, and their rush defense, and especially their trench play overall, which is mainly rush defense, but also, rush offense and pass pro, taken a big step forward. So if Tennessee gets up early on Georgia, it's not going to be like 7-0, which really isn't even getting up on someone early. That's like, just scoring on your first drive. If Tennessee gets up early, it's going to be something like 14-0, 17-0, 21-0. And I don't know if Georgia's offense is built to win a game that's a shootout. I don't think Stetson Bennett's built that way. I don't think the Georgia offense is built to win that way. Every game that they've engaged in under Kirby Smart that becomes a shootout, they lose. 2017 Auburn. 2019 LSU. 2020 Florida is an example. 2020 Alabama. 2021 Alabama. And there's probably other examples of this. I wouldn't call 2018 Alabama a shootout. 2018 LSU, though, you could call that somewhat of a shootout, or a game where LSU's offense consistently moved the ball. But you could also blame that on Georgia's old style of offense, which was very incompetent and slow. And Todd Monken has changed that. So I look at this game, and I think that it's going to be a high-scoring affair. One, like I look at this game, and the over-under is 66.5, which the closest to that would be both teams scoring 33 points. If you were to just split it evenly, I'm not a betting expert, and I'm not going to encourage betting. I'm just going to say I think that the total score will be higher, or it could be higher than that. I think that Georgia, despite the fact that they're not built to win a shootout, just given the nature of their passing offense and how it's taken a step forward this year, and they have weapons there, and the fact that Georgia's defense, if their offense can live up to its full potential, Georgia can play Tennessee's own game and just get one or two stops to seal the deal. So I think this is going to be a high-scoring affair, and Georgia can win it in a high-scoring affair. It's more likely that Tennessee will win it if it's a high-scoring game, just given the nature of how Tennessee functions. But I think it will be high-scoring. It will be close. There won't be a point in the game where I think any team is ahead of the other by more than 14 points. So like Tennessee being up 28-10 against Alabama, that thing isn't going to happen. I think that this game will be close. It'll be mostly back and forth. I just think at the end of the day, Tennessee, they're hot. They're more battle-tested. I think they're going to come out with the more fiery mentality. Tennessee has played in Alabama before. They've played teams that have a physical, raw talent advantage over them. They've done that before. Georgia has not. Georgia hasn't played anyone close to or above their level. The only team above their level by raw talent would be Bama. Above their level just by overall performance would probably be only Ohio State, maybe Tennessee, maybe Michigan at this point. And they haven't played either of those teams. And they're not going to until the postseason, with the exception of Tennessee in the regular season. And we don't even know if Tennessee's that good either. We don't, because Alabama hasn't looked like they were a top 4 team. They just haven't looked like it. And with the defense that Tennessee has, it could all fall apart if the right pieces come together and if Kirby Smart takes advantage of that. So Georgia's favored by 8 for a reason. I think Tennessee will win. If not, they will cover. But Georgia being the more consistent team, the reigning national champions, they have more raw talent. They're better in the trenches. They have the better defense. The only thing Tennessee's better at is wide receiver, QB, and special teams. And Georgia, to top it all off, is home field advantage. There's a reason that the Georgia Bulldogs are favored. Let's check the chat, and then we'll get back and talk a little Michigan versus Ohio State. Aaron Bryan, UGA beat Florida way worse than Tennessee and scored over 40. Nobody has a win like what Georgia had over Oregon, who moved the ball, if you watched. Absolutely. No one has that kind of win. The point is that was week 1. And Oregon looked horrible that game. Like, they looked completely unprepared. They looked flustered. They looked like they had no business even playing in week 1. And then they got a game against Eastern Washington to collect themselves. They played an overrated BYU team, and through building their resume, getting some wins against bad opponents, and just throwing out what didn't work. They have momentum. Oregon took advantage of their schedule and established momentum. And we're going to see when they face Utah, and they did it against UCLA. And I have absolute confidence Oregon's a top 15 team. We're going to see again, Oregon be tested against Utah. I'm very interested to see that. Aaron, Georgia, they've played, I know that they beat Florida by more than Tennessee did. I know that. Absolutely. And at the same time, there's a reason to use the transitive property, but you have to use it more than just for one game. And Georgia and Tennessee have only played, I think, one opponent that's similar. Georgia's played South Carolina, Missouri, Auburn, Vanderbilt, Florida. Tennessee has played Florida, LSU, Alabama, and Kentucky. Georgia has played the tougher conference schedule and non-conference schedule. Georgia has had the tougher non-conference schedule in retrospect. That is for sure. I look at this and look, Tennessee's more battle-tested. I think Tennessee will certainly start the game fast. I think they will, no matter how the game goes, I think they will at some point hold a lead over Georgia, maybe even a double-digit lead. It's just a question as to whether Georgia can bounce back from being down. And even if they do bounce back from being down, if Tennessee can just play 4 quarters of solid football, they can still come out, even if Georgia comes back or retakes the lead. Look at what happened to them versus Alabama. Alabama punched back, and Tennessee just punched back even harder. Buckeyes for life. Michigan and Ohio State both have trap games before they play each other. Yes, Maryland and Illinois. Ironically, 2 teams that are like little additions of the teams they face. Maryland is like a little addition of Ohio State. Illinois is like a little addition of Michigan. In fact, Illinois and Maryland are like the smaller or mini-me additions of Michigan or Ohio State's 2021 teams. Maryland does not have a great defense. Illinois has an offense that largely relies on defensive momentum, though they are very criminally efficient with the talent that they have. Much like 2021 Michigan. Elia Dabber Emeth. Penn State was forced into throwing and OSU took advantage of it. 1 player for OSU produced 4 turnovers. Yeah, that's not luck. It isn't. And you watch that game and Tui Malau made all of those plays. That's a scary player. He terrifies me. Like, Tui Malau, now granted, he was up against Penn State's backup tackle for at least part of the game, but still. Tui Malau, that's a player to watch, even if you're Michigan's offensive line. Same thing with Mike Hall, Tommy Eichenberg. Ohio State's defense has players. They have players. In a game that I think will be as big as Tennessee, Georgia, despite the fact that Michigan and Ohio State, it isn't going to be number 1 AP versus number 1 college football playoff. I don't think it's going to be that. But I think it's going to be just as big. Michigan and Ohio State are both 8-0, 5-0 in conference. There's already a spread out for this game. And unlike Georgia-Tennessee, where Georgia's favored, and a lot of people view, Georgia obviously is the raw talent advantage. Same thing with OSU over Michigan. Tennessee has a 7-1 record against the spread. Like, they have a record advantage in covering and in playing closer games and being better than people think they're going to be, than Georgia does. Michigan doesn't have that. Michigan and OSU both have a 4-3-1 record against the spread. Michigan had a fantastic record against the spread last year. Ohio State had about the same record against the spread that they're currently striving for this season. Michigan's given a 25.3% chance to win according to ESPN's FPI. Tennessee's given about a similar figure against Georgia. So yeah, it's crazy. Like, I look at this game and I think it's going to be a high scoring affair similar to the Tennessee-Georgia game, though I do think because mainly because of the fact I think there's less mismatch in this game. I don't think it will be... I would genuinely, with how good both of these defenses are and with some of the question marks they have in offense, I would be surprised to see this game, to see either team score north of 42 points. That would genuinely surprise me. Both of them score on average north of 40 points per game, but both have scoring defenses that allow less than 17 points per game. Michigan on average scores 41 points per game flat. Ohio State scores 48.9 points per game. Michigan allows 11.5 points per game. Ohio State allows 16.9 points per game. Both have offenses that have total yardages north of 460. Both have defenses that allow less than 275 yards per game. And both allow on defense less than 100 yards rushing per game. Michigan is much better at running the football. They're probably the best nation in running the football. Ohio State or Tennessee is number one. The other would be number two at passing the football. Michigan's not nearly as good at passing the football as Ohio State is, in the same way that Ohio State's not nearly as good at running the football as Michigan is. And on defense, Michigan, I would say, is a team that's more balanced on defense. Ohio State, with, let's just say, JT Tuimoloau, and with the great safeties that Ohio State has, Tanner McAllister being one of them, they have a higher upside. Ohio State does on defense, but they also have a lower floor. And you see that, I think you see that in their corners. Their corners, and occasionally their D-line their D-line will either play elite, and then there are moments where it's just above average. Michigan, they don't have the same upside that Ohio State has, but their D-line seems to always play at minimum good to great. Ohio State certainly has the edge at linebacker, but Michigan's good there. Michigan is the edge at corner. OSU is the edge at safety. D-line is really where the whole upside thing, in my opinion, comes to fruition. And that's for me. This game is huge. Like, let me tell you, I will watch this game from start to finish. Start to finish. Tickets are currently $390. They're probably going to skyrocket as it gets closer and closer. You have the nation's number one QB in CJ Stroud, probably the number one wide receiver room when healthy, definitely when healthy, against the number one running back and the number one offensive line in the country. Offenses and defenses, both with amazing upside. Both of these teams, you could not say this last year, both of these teams are national title contenders. If you combine the strengths and weaknesses of both of these teams, you have a team that could rival 2019 LSU, or 2020 Bama, or possibly 2001 Miami, though that might be reaching it, but I said might. It might be reaching it to compare it to those other teams too, but both of these teams are strong. They're physical. They're mentally tough. These teams are criticized for playing close games, and, rightfully so in some cases, but they always find a way to pull away and win by double digits at the end. Look at Michigan versus Indiana, Penn State, Michigan State. Struggle in the first half, chip away, and eventually blow out their opponent. Ohio State, look against Penn State and Notre Dame. They were trailing at points in the game, like in the third, and then they won by double digits. Like these two teams, they're second half teams, which is, in my opinion, better than a first half team. You'd rather be peaking, playing your best ball in the final minutes than you would be at the beginning and then going down, because that's like what 2021 Nebraska was, for example, or 2021 Penn State, or even this year's Penn State team. Like, you don't want winners. Winners always can survive through early adversity or even through late adversity. They always come out on top, though, and normally save their best for last. Whether it's in the Rocky movies or whether it's in college football, I think this statement holds true. You can't say that for starting fast and fizzling, which is Tennessee's most likely problem against Georgia, for example. I'm excited. here for this matchup. And I think that Ohio State being favored by 9.5, they were favored by more earlier in the year, but that number has come down. I think it will be a one-possession game. Not just one score, but Ohio State will win by 8 points or less. I would favor Ohio State to win in this. I think that Ohio State's the better team than Michigan. Is Michigan more stable? To a certain degree, I would say yes. I think that Ohio State, much like their defense against Michigan's defense, overall Ohio State has the higher upside, but they do have a slightly lower floor. Tennessee versus Georgia is a similar story. I just think some stars align, and I think that I frankly think Georgia's very similar to this Michigan team. And Ohio State is a better version of the current Tennessee team. Similar offense, but they have a better defense, especially a much better passing defense. It's going to be interesting. That's for sure. This matchup will be on 11/26 at noon Eastern time. You're going to have Gus Johnson and Joel Klatt commenting on this game. It will be close. I wouldn't be surprised if there is some controversy involving the result of this game, much like the 2016 matchup. This will not be a blowout like 2018, like 2016. This won't be a two-score game, like two-score domination. Not a blowout, but close, like 2017 or 2021. It won't be that. It'll be like 2016, or close to it. It'll be a one-score game, one-possession game. It'll be back and forth. There might be moments where it looked like one team is going to run away with it, but eventually the other will, come back, show its fists. It'll be a match of feeling each other out, of boxing, of paper cuts, of deep slices, but no team is going to lay down and die. That won't happen here. Both of these teams are too good to just lay down and die. It would be ironic, Hummus Hero, if Kelly finally beat Saban after leading Notre Dame. And Michigan has not won in Columbus in 2000, and that's really one of the main facts to know about this game. And it's totally baked into the point spread. It's totally baked into the preseason and current expectations of this matchup. Part of the reason people think Ohio State could blow out Michigan is mostly tied to that fact. Michigan has not won in Columbus since 2000. And that's part of the reason I'm not picking them to win. Now, if Michigan, for example, plays like fantastic ball over the next 3 games and Ohio State looks sluggish, maybe Ohio State wins in a shootout to Maryland or somehow loses in a shootout to Maryland, which is about as unlikely as Michigan losing at home to Illinois, if not less likely, then maybe I'll pick Michigan, or I'd probably pick Michigan to win in Columbus. But Ohio State overall has been playing similar or better ball than Michigan has, in a different way, yes, but by winning it's been similar or better. Their strength of schedule, now that they've both played Penn State, is pretty similar. Ohio State does have the stronger strength of record, mostly because they face non-conference opponent Notre Dame, who's 5-3, and will likely be ranked again at some point in the season. I appreciate your donation, Fox Body Blues. He says you appreciate my analysis. Thank you very much. Illinois is a paper tiger. They haven't played any of the best offenses yet. There's some truth there, but I will tell you, those Brett Bielema teams, just look at last year, look at his tenure at Wisconsin, they find ways to win, ways to frustrate you, ways to break you. I mean, very much like, the good Kirk Ferentz teams or the good Paul Chryst teams, though Paul Chryst never beat Ohio State. Kirk Ferentz and Brett Bielema have beaten Ohio State in their coaching tenures, respectively. Illinois hasn't played Purdue yet, though I think that would be a solid Illinois win. I think Illinois would beat them in a very similar way to how Wisconsin beat Purdue. That could be a bloodbath where, Chase Brown rushes for 300 yards and Tommy DeVito takes like a few read options for several yards. So yeah, I think this will be an 11-0 matchup. I think the winner is a lock to the college football playoff. The loser, given that Clemson's undefeated and that Tennessee is currently undefeated, just given the nature of the chaos of college football actually has worked against the loser of this game going, if I'm being honest. But the Pac-12, some of those one-loss teams will have 2 losses at the conclusion of championship week. That's for sure. The Big 12, I don't know if TCU is going to survive at 8-0. But if you're a Michigan fan like me, you want Clemson to lose at some point. You want TCU to lose. You want everyone. I mean, you want the winner of the Tennessee-Georgia game to lose. You want LSU to beat Alabama and then lose in the SEC championship game. All of this would work in Michigan's favor. Michigan needs even more chaos if they're going to go into Columbus and lose, or if Ohio State hosts Michigan and loses to Michigan. The loser of this game does not control their own destiny in regards to the college football playoff. I thought a few weeks ago the loser of this game would still be close to a lock to being the 4th or 3rd seed. It doesn't look like that right now, which I think is unfortunate because I'd love to see an Ohio State-Michigan national title game. I predicted that a few weeks ago, but there's still a few weeks left for all this to shake out. And I'm excited for Michigan to travel into Columbus with a chance to win and repeat as Big Ten champions. And with that, I'm going to read a few more chats, and then we're going to end this segment. It is possible we see an all Big Ten and SEC playoff. Very possible, Hummus Hero. And Jack, the Big Ten is bad this year. I will not deny that. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys live Monday. There's a video that just released a few minutes ago previewing Michigan and Rutgers, and there will be a video or 2 that releases tomorrow. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys around. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so already. Talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.